Welcome, everybody. My name's David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. It's great to have you. So it's a real pleasure to welcome Mim Nelson to the Mitchell Center. I was lucky enough to bump into her. She happened to have the good fortune to be in France looking up at the Alps, but I was just sitting on the campus at UNH the first time that happened. But in that very first conversation, I realized this was somebody we wanted to know more about and we could learn a lot from, and I mean that in multiple ways. She's only been at the University of New Hampshire for about 18 months, and she's the Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer and Director of the Sustainability Institute, which is a very interesting program that I've known about and followed for a long time. But before she came to UNH, she was the Associate Dean of Tufts University's Tisch College of Citizenship and Public Service, Professor of Nutrition in the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. So her background, very strong in nutrition, but right after she got her Ph.D. at Tufts, she did one of these triple American Association for the Advancement of Science Congressional Fellowship, which if you ever want to figure out how to link the knowledge you learn in a university with the real world, what a great place to go do that. I have lots of colleagues who've been fellows, and we talk sometimes at the Mitchell Center about how we want to link knowledge with action. You might not think as much action is happening in Washington these days as some periods, but we shouldn't stop trying. I can't even begin to describe all the amazing work she has done since she did her PhD, because it sure went out beyond nutrition to look at public policy from many different directions. Her research was the foundation for the Strong Women program, which is a community-based public health program for women implemented in more than 35 states. She's an international best-selling author with appearances on Good Morning America, and I'm reminded, Oprah, and I don't even think Senator Mitchell was on Oprah, so there you go. And one of the interesting things here is that she's come to see food systems as a sustainability problem, so both about human well-being and environmental well-being. And this is highly relevant to the work that goes on here, because there's wonderful people in the audience, and probably some who can't make it today, who are doing food systems research, whether in the School of Food and Agriculture, Cooperative Extension, with shellfishing economies, where actually we had a $6 million grant from the National Science Foundation in partnership with the University of New Hampshire. And much of that work continues. We have folks like Melissa and Francois from the Sustainable Food Systems Research Collaborative in the Honors College, which is doing great work. There's a food waste policy effort that's underway, being led by folks in the Mitchell Center that are part of the materials management team, and they just had a big stakeholder meeting here not that many weeks ago. Tim Waring and his group has a local food organizations project that's funded by NSF. So the intersections, food is literally a nexus, right, for so many things that we need to be thinking about if we're going to try to create a sustainable future. So today she's going to talk about her work as a member of the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, and unless I'm mistaken, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine just released a report about those guidelines, the product of that work. So you can tell this is on a lot of people's minds right now, and I have a feeling she's going to help us understand some of the complexities of that work. So please join me in welcoming Mim Nelson.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I am not sure that I've ever been this far north in Maine yet.
Wow.
And yet I visited Maine all the time. And so thank you for bringing me up so far, and it's lovely that it's the middle of July or August, and there's no climate change going on, and it's 90 degrees out there. Anyway, thank you so much for inviting me up here. I love to talk about some of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of decades. Today, I am going to focus my remarks and on some work that I did with the U.S. government around dietary guidelines. I have a sense there are a few people in here that are in the food nutrition world. This was a very interesting project with some very interesting outcomes, and just wanted to, it's important for me to reflect on this so I can figure out where we go from here. But I'm going to speak for maybe half hour, at the most 35, 40 minutes, so I want to leave a lot of time for discussion. There are a lot of other things that I work on as well, so I'm happy to branch out and talk about some more of the current work that I'm doing as well on sustainability at UNH. So again, thank you for having me. So as David mentioned, I was on the 2015 dietary guidelines. I was also on the 2010 dietary guidelines, and I also vice chaired the 2008 physical activity guidelines for Health and Human Services. That was not a USDA and HHS. So very involved. For about 10 years I was basically a special government employee working on this public policy work. And it's interesting because I did work for Senator Leahy when I first finished my Ph.D. work, and while I didn't do public policy work right after that, that work in the field, so to speak, really has influenced almost everything that I do. So you never know what your schooling and your experiences. That was kind of my postdoc, was working for Senator Leahy, and very non-traditional, but it's definitely had a huge influence on me. So let's see. All right, so I'm going to talk about what are the guidelines. I won't spend too much on sort of the background of the guidelines. I want to get into some of the work that we did, but want to talk about why add sustainability in 2015, what the process was, what the response was, and where do we go from here. The evolution of the guidelines, they started in 1980, was the first time that the federal government developed dietary guidelines, and I will say every 5 years they're mandated by Congress. Ironically, when I worked for Senator Leahy in 1987, I'm dating myself right now, I was the staffer that developed the nutrition monitoring bill that got passed by both houses and became the mandate for the guidelines to come out every 5 years. So little did I know that I would go back and work on that. And so I don't think it was a conflict of interest. But they come out every 5 years, and they basically develop what is the policy. These are not oriented, designed for individuals, although there is a whole interface for individuals, but more for the federal policy programs, which I'll talk about in just a minute. They are for people ages 2 and older, although the next panel will be looking at from birth up to 24 months as well, including those that have increased risk, but this is not for specific disease categories. They're for policymakers, nutrition educators, and health professionals, and they are produced, most people think they come out of the USDA, but they come out of HHS and USDA every 5 years. In 2010, the call to action was to make sure that all Americans have nutritious foods and opportunities for physical activity, to facilitate both behavior change and societal change. This was a big shift in 2010, and I was thrilled to be able to lead that work, that it's not, you can't just tell somebody, you need to eat well and this is what you need to eat and so now go and eat, that actually the food environment in society has a huge influence on how we eat as well. And that it sets the stage for lifelong healthy eating and weight management, physical activity throughout somebody's life, and that everybody has a role in helping to create change. So just some data here. This is from the N. Haynes data. This is actually from about 2010, and I think this is this the laser pointer?
Yeah.
But it's not working. That's okay. Don't worry about it. You can easily see, so in the red bars is what is below the recommended amount of intake, and the blue is above, and thank you. You can see with fruit, vegetables, dairy, whole grains, seafood, nuts, seeds, and soy, pretty much all Americans are well below the recommended amount. And when you look at sodium, saturated fat, empty calories, refined grains, and meat, poultry, and eggs, look at that, that is awesome. Then what you see is, in fact, everybody is getting more than the recommended amount. What we'd love to do is try to swap all of these things so that we're more in balance. The average American's getting about, I think it's, I'm going to have the nutritionists in the room correct me, but it's less than like 1 serving a day of fruits, and it's mostly some apples, some orange juice, bananas. It's not too much. In terms of vegetables, it's does anybody know what is the largest eaten vegetable? Touch it. Potatoes. So potatoes, and French fries are considered potatoes. Now, I think a good old potato, and I'm in the state of Maine, so I get to say it, good old baked potato is a vegetable, but when you start thinking about French fries, so nutrition gets pretty complicated really fast. And when you think about it, just take yourself on a mental voyage down any grocery store right now. First off, the average size of a grocery store is enormous. And then think about all the aisles, not the perimeter, but you think about all the aisles, and what do you see down the aisle? Pretty much all the aisles look close to this. What do you see? What are you seeing? Packaging. Sodas. Sugar. Salt. Fat. Colors.
I don't see any chocolate.
Yeah. So yeah, you're seeing added sugars, you're seeing sodium, you're seeing plastic, you're seeing packaging, lots of colors, lots of food colors. I mean, it's a pretty amazing world when you think about most of the center aisles, with the exception of a few canned vegetables and some soup and some paper goods and things like that. It's pretty extraordinary. So there's a lot of work to do, and very few Americans are meeting the 5 fruits and vegetables a day. In fact, we are as a country, we produce, we're 10 million acres shy of production for fruits and vegetables as well. So we aren't even producing the number of fruits and vegetables that we need to eat. So everything is skewed in terms of the whole system. So just a tiny little bit of civics around the guidelines. The guidelines process is a 2-year process. This is all going to change, maybe, we're not sure. Everything is sort of in flux at the moment. But it is basically a 2-year process where experts are nominated to HHS and USDA. Then the HHS and USDA put together the panel of experts, the Federal Advisory Committee. Usually there's around 12 to 14 people, and you make sure that there's representation across all sorts of different areas of nutrition and public health. We are then in panel. We go through a 6-month conflict of interest process where it is close to being confirmed as like a secretary. I mean, it's unbelievable what we go through in terms of our conflicts of interest, which I think is a very good thing and makes me nervous about what's going to happen in the future, so that we don't have conflicts of interest. And then we meet in public settings. Everything we do is in a public room. It is live fed so that people can watch what we're doing. We never meet as a whole committee. We do meet as subcommittees, but we never meet as a whole committee unless it is transparent and everything is out in the open. All our deliberations, our decision making. And there's about 2 years of that while we work to decide where is the research and what needs to be changed in terms of guidelines. So we don't just every 5 years change all the guidelines. It's more, where is the evidence? And I won't get into all of these pieces. I'm going to be focusing on sustainability, but for example, added sugar was not a part of the guidelines until 15, but the evidence is so strong now that we were able to bring that forward to 2015. And so that was a new science that we could bring to the forefront. I will say that they tend to be pretty conservative, and historically, and I could spend an hour, and I'm not going to do it, on the history of how the guidelines focused on nutrients versus then foods, but I like to think that the last 7 years we've been focusing on food, patterns of foods versus nutrients. But there was serious industry manipulation back in 1977 before the first guidelines came out, and that's where I think things went awry, and I'm happy to talk about that as well if people are interested. Once we deliberate, we send the report, it's about 500 pages, to the secretaries, and then the secretaries, there's a public comment period, and then there's a writing group within the federal government that actually develops the guidelines. So I don't write the federal guidelines. That is by a writing committee in the federal government. So in 2000, as I said, for 2015, I decided to jump off a cliff and to really start to think about sustainability. And I wanted to do this to be honest, in 2010, but our committee was not the right mix, and the science wasn't there. And I didn't think, and Bush at the time was going into that, was in office. I didn't think that the administration was going to have the tolerance for it, and so it wasn't the right timing. I didn't think that I would go back and be asked to be on it again in 2015, but I felt like all the elements were right to bring into thinking food and the sustainability and sustainable diets within the guidelines. So why even think about this? And probably you guys know this even better than I do, but global food production is responsible for about 80% of deforestation, 70% of fresh water use, roughly 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, and the largest cause of species biodiversity loss in the world. So food is has a huge footprint in terms of sustainability. And not only environmental sustainability, but social and economic as well. I'm not going to be talking about social and economic today. And so it seemed like it was the right time. The guidelines since 1980 have always been focused on food security. I will say more in a narrow sense of food security in terms of, do people have adequate and healthy and safe food, affordable food, to meet their nutritional needs. And if the true sense of food security is meet the needs now and in the future, and as soon as you add the future into that vocabulary, immediately you have to think about long-term food security. If we're going to be feeding the world with the billions of people that are going to be inhabiting this world, we need to think about long-term food security. So therefore, food sustainability is in scope. This was central to us being able to do the work because we had to stay in scope. So why else do I think this is important? I like to think in systems and think about how we have influence. And the reality is so the guidelines influence and set policy for food assistance programs. The school lunch program services 30 million children a day, and it's about $11 billion a year of food that is procured for school lunch program. For women, infants and children, the WIC program, it's about 8 million children per month, or about $6 billion of food that is procured. The SNAP program, which is food stamps, it reaches about 46 million people per month and is about a $74 billion food as well. So we're talking billions of dollars. And if you start to think about creating influence and you start to sort of go a little bit upstream and you think, wow, if we had a policy where all the beef that is procured, I'm like, this is blue ocean thinking, this is like crazy thinking, but if you thought about all the beef that's procured for all the federal food programs needs to be sustainable, or the fish, or you think about the vegetables and how they are grown and everything else, all of a sudden, if you could shift this system, you would be making huge inroads, because then companies are shifting the way they are going to be producing food. I'm getting way ahead of myself, but this is where I start to think about pushing the envelope. So food security definition for the guidelines was food security exists when all people now and in the future, and that is a very essential clause, have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. And sustainable diets are a pattern of eating that promotes health and well-being and provides food security for present population while sustaining human and natural resources for future generations. So these are both very, very linked. So we are in deliberation. We are roughly a third of the way through our work. We're meeting I think we met about every 3 months or so, came together in Washington. And so we started out with, it's just like classic researchers. Everything operates under questions. So we develop questions that we then want to look at where is the evidence. We had this huge long list, as you can imagine. We're like kids in a candy store. That's probably not the right metaphor for this. But we have a huge list of questions. And what you start to realize is every question takes a lot of effort to answer. So we have to start narrowing that list of questions down and making sure that those questions are focused on these two definitions, because this then allows us to be in scope to do our work. So what we ended up with, in fact, and I can't remember, and I'm sorry I can't remember, but we had, with the whole guidelines process, with all the different committees, we had 5 different committees, subcommittees, we had around 56 questions, somewhere in that vicinity. In the end, our work on sustainability had 4 questions, and these are the 4 questions. We narrowed it down to what is the relationship between population level dietary patterns that promote health and long-term food sustainability. So what's the overlap between a healthy pattern and a sustainable pattern of eating? What are the comparative nutrient profiles of current farm-raised versus wild-caught seafood? What are the comparative contaminant levels of current farm-raised versus wild-caught seafood? And what's the worldwide capacity to produce farm-raised versus wild-caught seafood that's nutritious and safe for Americans? So we had 1 question directly related to food sustainability in the end, and 3 that were related to seafood, because seafood is such a health-promoting food. However, there are real concerns in terms of, are we going to be able to have the capacity to feed people enough seafood for it to be healthy? So looking at the first question, we have this amazing team of staffers at the USDA and HHS, that librarians and scientists that help us to really frame these research questions and then go out and look at the evidence and bring the evidence together. For the first question, we used systematic reviews to look at that question, and we found 15 high-quality, low-bias research studies to answer the first question. The answer, once we all did all of the research, was, in fact, our major conclusion was that a dietary pattern. Now you guys are all going to go, duh, I'm sorry, but it's important to back this up. But a dietary pattern that's higher in plant-based foods, such as vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and lower in animal-based foods is more health-promoting and is associated with a lesser environmental impact than the current average U.S. diet. There are some pieces to this that are hard to unpack. Like we just did say lower in animal-based foods. Beef, I will tell you, is the big driver here, but we felt we didn't have enough evidence. The evidence from our 15 studies was more around all animal-based foods, not just beef. We then looked at seafood, which was fascinating. I didn't lead this question, but it was really fascinating looking at the sort of worldwide capacity for seafood. And what we saw was that for commonly consumed fish species in the U.S., such as salmon, trout, bass, and cod, farm-raised fish, and this is the majority of farm-raised fish, and this is ends up being hyper-local and all dependent, of course, on the animal husbandry, but that farm-raised fish have as much or more omega-3 fatty acids of EPA and DHA, which are the health-promoting fatty acids, as the same species caught in the wild. And this is an important thing because it turns out that if you are taking good care of these fish, they have a very similar profile to the wild caught. For the wild and farm species, the risks of contaminants are similar and do not outweigh the health benefits of seafood consumption, such as decreased cardiovascular disease, also developmental improvements with young children. So in terms of contaminants, they're quite similar. Again, this is highly dependent. There are some wild species, depending on where they are in the world, that are highly contaminated, and there are also some farm-grade species, so this becomes very hyper-local again. And in terms of the U.S. population, really should be encouraged to eat a wide variety of seafood that can be caught in the wild or farmed, and they are nutrient dense and uniquely rich sources of healthy fatty acids and high quality proteins. In terms of the worldwide capacity, and this is not my expertise, but I think this graph is really quite remarkable, is what we saw, and probably some of you in the world in this room know this better, but we had real collapses of species in the 70s and early 80s, and then there were a number of international treaties that were put together, and what we see is that that the capacity in terms of wild caught is, this is what, I mean, we're probably not going to change this capacity of the oceans and the seas to produce wild caught food, but that where we're going to make up the difference for worldwide population is going to be with aquaculture, not with wild caught food. And I think it's an important, it's the Earth's capacity for wild caught food. So this is an important thing to know. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say about this process and these questions. We did put together a conceptual framework as we were doing our work because there are a lot of frameworks out there, but none that really we felt were looking at sustainable diets, and we felt this was important to help guide some of the work moving forward. And you'll see this is not a image mistake, but you see values right here. Values really underpin all of the work that everybody does. And we need to establish a culture of healthy eating. We need to embrace equitable solutions. We need to encourage active citizenship and the stewardship of the natural resources. People need to be transparent in their work and support universal food security. But then there's the consumer side and there's the supply chain participants. Both ends are critical for this when we look at a whole food systems piece. And waste is a huge issue on both sides, but so is sort of the consumer demand will drive what companies are going to be producing. But also, I think we can't shy away from technology, but we also need to be thinking about capital and labor being used responsible and conserving natural resources and enhancing biodiversity. And underpinning all of that is policies, both a small p and a big P. So we do need to have public policies. They need to be based on evidence and the facts. And we need to make sure that multiple stakeholders are engaged in this policy. But I also really believe in policies that businesses put together for their work, that municipalities put together, states put together, universities. I believe in policy both from the small p and the larger P. A critical element that we spoke about quite a bit in our committee was this aligning policies, because what happens is actually in the federal government and many other places, you have policies that are actually in conflict with each other, and it's hard to harmonize policies, but it's important to really understand that energy policy and food policy and human health policy should all be linked and complementary. They aren't necessarily, but there are some checks and balances that are in place, but they're not well orchestrated. So what happened? So we submitted our report in February or January of 2015. And then what happened was it's put out for public comment. And in 2010, I think we had about 1,300 unique public comments. In 2015, we had 30,000 public comments, 8,000 unique public comments. 80% of the public comments were in favor of sustainability. And I'll talk about some of the campaigns that happened. It was really a wild thing to sort of watch this unfold. We were doing our work and we were surprised that there wasn't more, every meeting that we had as a committee, all of the lobbyists and the food companies are basically either watching, streaming online, or they're actually in the room, because what we come up with affects companies to a huge extent. It's not influencing our work. Our work is based on the science, but these companies want to watch what's happening. We were surprised that not much chatter was out there as we were doing our work, but as soon as they were ready, as soon as our document was published. There was unprecedented press coverage across the board for and against sustainability. Sustainability was the huge tripwire, but so was eating less beef, which was in another committee in terms of just looking at health, not looking at sustainability. We came out with another finding, which was people should eat more fruits and vegetables and eat less beef, especially red and processed meat. And so there was unprecedented press coverage. By the fall, there was so much heat that the two secretaries in the fall, in October, decided, there was a rider, and they decided that, in fact, the Ag Appropriations Committee in the Senate did a rider to instruct the USDA to include only nutrition, which we don't know what quite that means, but to basically exclude sustainability in the actual 2015 dietary guidelines. By October, there was a lot more coordination between USDA and HHS, and then October 6th of 15, HHS, the secretaries did a blog indicating sustainability would absolutely be excluded from the 2015 dietary guidelines. A lot of people are like, oh God, you must be so sorry, and all this. Well, I never dreamed in my wildest dreams that we'd get as far as we did with sustainability. The fact that we got 30,000 public comments, almost all of them positive, including many from the private sector, many from the private sector, showed me that the readiness for this topic area, we were ripe for this to move forward. It was really, I believe it was the livestock industry that really put the screws on Secretary Vilsack, and that's what was the deciding blow. When sort of analyzing this more deeply, there's lessons to be learned from what happened with tobacco. As soon as the Surgeon General in 1964 came out with the fact that tobacco was unhealthy for people, it's going way back. What the industry has a real methodology that is extremely effective, and it's about creating doubt. So you create doubt about the science, you discredit the scientists, and you deflect the topic area. And so this is exactly what happened. I don't know, I love, there's dissertations out there on this exact what happened, but I have to believe that, millions and millions of dollars were used to discredit me, the other scientists on our committee, to discredit the science itself, which is really solid. In fact, we have since, the subcommittee, we've since done another paper and peer-reviewed where we had additional papers that only corroborate this work. And then to really deflect the issues, that this isn't about sustainability, we don't need to think long-term, we need to just think right here and very narrow. So it's a fascinating work that the public relations and the media really works on in terms of creating doubt. And then, as I said, there was the House Ag Committee hearing, and then sustainability was taken off the table. There was My Plate, My Planet was a campaign that was developed by Mr. Cameron, who produced Avatar. He really is into sustainability, and he's funded a lot of this work. And there were hundreds of different signatories, and this was a full page. I don't know if you call public service announcements but it was an ad in the Washington Post and the New York Times around My Plate, My Planet, Food for a Sustainable Nation, that sort of came out of all of this work. It was really incredible to see the outpouring of work. There was also Hands Off My Hot Dog, which was another campaign that was developed and was heavily funded. Really, it's you've heard this from folks that are like, stay out of my kitchen, don't tell me what to eat. And I won't even put the politics behind it, because it's not really about politics, it's more of a frame of mind. Yet those folks don't understand that the manipulation of the food industry around what's in their kitchen is much stronger than what, in fact, the federal government is in terms of guidelines. So Hands Off My Hot Dog was also a big campaign that got a lot of press. I happen to just choose this picture. So there was, in the Washington Post, there was this: I'm following recommendations that I eat all my former reports, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. I don't know exactly what that means, but thought it was hysterical. Vilsack was quoted as saying, folks who put those reports together, they have freedom. They're like my 3-year-old granddaughter. She does not have to color inside the lines. His 5-year-old grandson, he said, he's learning to color within the lines. That poor child. But I'm going to color inside the lines. So this was a direct thing against me. And so the guidelines did come out. They did not have sustainability. And in fact, we weren't surprised at that. We thought, though, that everything else was, everything except for eat less red meat and processed meat. So that did not make it into the guidelines, and that is, in my estimation, a direct result of political pressure, not on us as a committee, but on the federal government not to include those. So eat a healthy pattern of eating, focus on a variety of nutrient-dense foods. I can't believe that nutrient-dense still stayed in here. That is another moniker for beef and dairy. Limit calories from added sugar and saturated fats and reduce sodium. Shift to healthier foods and beverage choices, and support healthy eating patterns for all. So pretty basic, but it's more focused on a healthy eating pattern than on nutrients themselves. So who won? I really do think the livestock industry won in this, but I also think the time has shortened between what consumers are demanding and what's going to happen. We have shortened the time course for needed change. And I really do believe that the private sector is going to be the leader in this work. But we're going to, higher ed, education, consumers, researchers, advocates are going to be pushing it. And so I think what we did was we narrowed the timeline where the change is going to be happening. And I'm really happy to see a number of things that are happening in the private sector around water reduction, greenhouse gas emissions, work around less deforestation, things such as that. Other countries have also done this work: Brazil, the Netherlands, Canada. I'll talk about Canada in just a minute. Sweden, the UK, and others are working on it as well. For Brazil, they were the first to really push this, but healthy diets derived from socially and environmentally sustainable food systems. Dietary recommendations need to take into account the impact of the means of production and distribution on food, on social justice and environmental integrity. They wrote it so well. This was one of 5 overarching principles. The Netherlands, no more than 2 servings of meat per week, less than 500 grams, and no more than 300 grams of red meat, very specific. Canada just came out this summer, and they actually, I'm so happy because they verbatim took all of our research and the exact language and used, and they have a history of that, which is, we work together on a lot of these guidelines, but they eliminated the dairy group as a guideline, increased consumption of plant-based foods, recommendations to consider determinants of health, cultural diversity, and the environment, and built on evidence-based and language developed during our DGA process, and they use diets higher in plant-based foods and lower in animal-based foods are associated with lesser environmental impact and health. I had to pick a lobster. This was from our lobster bake this summer because I'm in Maine. So what can we do to see this work through? I really believe what we need to do is to build the science base. We need to build the business case for this, the legal case for thinking about sustainability. I'm working with we have a law school at UNH, so I'm working with a wonderful food policy scholar to think about the legal case, and we need to increase consumer demand. So I'm going to stop, and I'm happy to answer questions and have discussions. So thank you so much for being such a good audience. Thanks.